calculated and weighted trust. Signs and tells of a weak mindset, distrust. Welcome. The jazz of psychology brings you another dose of psychology and everyday life mix with a twist in. Advice, paid versus free. Here's a fun one for you to ponder on. Let's consider what trust is and where it comes from first. People have different ways of evaluating people and judge them accordingly, based on that evaluation. Trust is one of those things. There is a reason why they say, "In God we trust, all others pay cash." Wait for it. Ever meet someone who listens to others more than their own people? Like taking advice from a stranger, rather than listening to a family member? Or how someone will take the advice of a paid professional more than, say, the person's own partner. Ever wonder why that happens? Wonder no more, you're about to find out. First of all, we start by noting that in both cases the misguided trust has nothing to do with analyzing information and making a selection based on the outcome. But it does have everything to do with a weak mindset and how it understands trust in general. We'll take a quick look at both cases, but our focus will be as advertised in the post title. So for the first example, advice from a stranger, the problem lies deep within the subconsciousness of the weak mindset. Mainly it is rooted in constant self-doubt and low self-esteem. A person like that is never sure about anything, has doubts about everything they do, and is constantly afraid of having done something the wrong way. Worst case, they project those fears onto people who are closest around them, like their own spouse and children, for instance. In some cases, they display a major case of criticism towards others and themselves. It all stems from the person not trusting themselves first of all. As a result, they do not trust anyone close to them as well, and are prone to taking advice from random strangers on a bus, rather than their loved ones. Reasons for this type of self-distrust is a matter for another time. For the sake of the argument, we'll leave it at that for now. However, you have met the type, probably, right? So moving on. For the second example, we'll explore the paid versus free advice dilemma. The idea here is quite self-explanatory. The psychology behind it, again, lies with misguided self-confidence. People with a weak mindset tend to trust people more when they pay for the service. The trust is in equal correlation with how much does the person, personally, know about the topic. For instance, dog training versus getting a haircut. If a person has been getting their hair cut for a good few decades, if not more, then they feel quite an expert on the topic. The logic here is that the years of the same action, the experience, accumulate into solid knowledge. So, when faced with an unexplored topic like owning a dog, the person is more likely to listen to expert advice, especially if they pay for it, because they are able to admit least that much, that they do not know anything about owning a dog. The problem here is that not all paid advice is good advice. There are plenty of professionals out there who will take your money and give advice, like, if your dog does not behave, just don't feed it until it listens to you. It won't matter if it will take an hour or a day. There are people out there who listen to such advice still. Mortified? Probably so. The thing is, a dog is a living creature. If a person owns a dog, they bear the responsibility to provide food for the living creature. Training and discipline are a different matter. And yet some people will do as told nonetheless. Why? Because that advice is paid for, ergo it cannot be wrong. People with a weak mindset have difficulties processing information. That is why they turn to alternative methods for validation. They calculate and weigh the information provided, not by the quality of the information itself, but rather based on who it was that provided the information. When a weak mindset has trouble trusting people, they judge the advice given by the importance of the person, like a supervisor at work versus the boyfriend or girlfriend. It even comes down to the fact that both people can give the same advice, but the partner's words won't be acknowledged, whereas the person will take note of the words spoken by the big boss rather eagerly. But wait, there's more. Sometimes people will pay for advice or service and what they consider rather a lot of money and still not trust it. Why? Because a weak mindset thinks that, well, for this amount of money, I need to make sure I am getting its worth. That's when they become involved in the process or begin coordinating the actions of others. usually of the very same paid professional. This happens when people have trust issues overall. Usually, the idea is that the more one pays, the better the service, right? Like getting a car part for $20 and $200. There is a good chance that the quality of the parts will differ between the two pieces. A strong mindset will choose to pay the $200 and will trust that it's the right decision. How it turns out is another matter. Some of you might want to argue here. There will be a time for that, don't worry, just not right now. Whereas a weak mindset will go, why pay $200 when I can get this for $20? True, there are things heavily overpriced, but when talking about a car part, see, all of it circles back to a person's understanding of the matter at hand. If the person believes they know better, they will act appropriately. This usually indicates a settled, rigid perception. The same principle is applied to other things like a research topic. For example, marketing versus chemistry in cosmetics. For a beginner, the process of how it's made and how to sell it should be equally important, especially if the person isn't an expert in either area. Why would someone start a cosmetics line without the right know-how in the first place? Because that's not the focus now. The weighing of which topic deserves more attention goes by which topic sounds more serious. The decision is made as follows. Anyone can sell a bar of soap, but not anyone can make it. In other words, the person trusts their sales abilities, but not their knowledge of science, although they lack the skill and knowledge in both. Well, the thing is, even the greatest product won't sell with poor marketing. True is vice versa too. Even the greatest of marketing won't compensate for the poor quality of the product. A strong mindset understands the equation and acts accordingly for best results. A weak mindset will decide on things based on which is scarier, hence why chemistry wins against marketing. Everything circles back to psychology behind perception. The difference between weighing and analyzing lies in the outcome. When people weigh the A against the B, there will, most likely, always be one side that comes out on top. Analyzing is taking both the A and the B, inspecting them both, and taking the information out of each of them. That seems like the most useful one. Or simply taking note for future reference. Both actions seem to be processing information. But in reality, they are the complete opposites. You have reached the end of this post. Thanks for listening, stay tuned for more, and always remember, mental health is important. Take care.
Why speaking a language only is not enough. Miscommunication. Welcome. The jazz of psychology brings you another dose of psychology, an everyday life mixed with a twist in language, knowing versus speaking. The thing with languages, they are not the same words only, they are a different culture, customs, people, mindset. It is not enough to speak a language to be able to communicate with people in the truest sense. A person can speak 40 languages. It won't mean much if all they are able to express is their own perspective only. Except that knowing 40 languages is majorly impressive. But, back to the point. To truly understand a language, a person must learn about the culture and about the people too. How they think, what they believe, and the reasons why. This includes local references, proverbs, or even music and cinema. For a person to be able to understand those cultural differences, they need to be able to understand the roots, the source, of where those differences come from. Luckily for you, psychology can be quite handy here. Quick side note, cultural differences are not limited to cultures and countries alone. You'll see why soon. Some of you might have heard these before. People from there are so cold. Or in that country the people are. Here's the thing, it's not the people. It's the mindset. Each country has its own traditions, clothing style and cuisine. Each country also has its own mindset that has formed over the generations of people living in a certain area, in a certain way. Each country has a default mindset, as a baseline for the country. Certain areas of the world might share similarities between their mindsets, because of the proximity of having lived next to each other for centuries. Like Asia, or South America, for instance. The countries share a continent, region of the world. Languages spoken are similar, if not the same at times. The cultures share similarities, even people can share physical traits and features. Yet each country has differences that make them stand out from the crowd that they are proud of. Usually, that is. Don't want to exaggerate anything. That's why sometimes people might get angry when someone mixes two countries up. Those who travel a lot probably have experienced it, if not personally, then know someone who has. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Language is used to communicate between people. To do it effectively, they need to understand the topic they want to talk about, or at least be willing to learn about it. However, to do it successfully, a person must have the right mindset first. The same principle applies to translations. How, you ask? Simple. It is not enough to simply translate word from word, language to language. Not even gonna touch the grammar part. That's not the point now. The point is that to effectively make a translation, the person has to have a good understanding of the language, obviously. But to truly make a great translation, an understanding of the culture of the language is just as important. Not to mention to have a good grasp of the topic that needs translating, in the first place, should there be one, of course. Why is that last part important? Because each language has its own slang and references that people of different cultures or even ages understand. It helps to make translations, communication in general, relatable. People are prone to feelings of familiarity. So, to make it happen, sometimes people need to translate heavy subjects into easy-to-understand ones, and by using the right toolkit they are able to achieve that. It's one thing to translate a paper on space travel for rocket scientists, and it's a completely different story to translate one for common people, who share nothing in common with space travel. The same can be said about people of different ages. You know, like boomers, millennials and Gen Z. It's not the age that is the problem, but the mindset behind each age category. Age, too, can be considered a cultural difference. Don't see it? Think of it this way. Each group grew up in a different time, culture, listening to different music, reading different books, watching different movies. But someone who is in their mid-teens now and listens to millennial, boomer-level music will probably have a better chance understanding the references from the lyrics when someone uses them, even though that person is growing up now and not then. Why would a 15-year-old listen to AC/DC instead of Nicki Minaj? Who knows, just saying. Anyhow, back to the point. When it comes to language, it can happen sometimes that certain phrases are not translatable into other languages, because the other languages do not have the right mindset to be able to express that specific phrase, or rather, that specific mindset. In order to be able to translate that essence, a person must understand what it means and find an analogy for it in the other language, to be able to make the translation as accurate as possible, without losing that essence. Hence why culture, references and insight into the topic are, or at least can be, equally important. To be honest, we don't need to discuss foreign languages. Everyone knows the feeling of miscommunication. The only sad difference is, it makes more sense with a foreign language, because it's new, in progress, or out of practice. However, miscommunication happens in everyday life more than often, unfortunately, even when people do speak the same language and culture, and are of the same age, too. Miscommunication happens not because of not speaking the same words, but because the same words are understood differently. The problem lies with perception, which is based on psychology. In other words, it's not the people who are communicating with each other, but the mindsets. Psychology helps to understand the meaning of the words for each mindset that speaks them. By reshaping the words into acceptable ones for the certain mindset, a person can increase their chances of communicating successfully, because it allows for the mindset to understand the person in their vocabulary. Like so, instead of trying to prove a point to the person B, by explaining in the terms of the person A, why not explain it in the words of person B from the start? When the mindsets share enough similarities, they are able to communicate effectively. It is when the differences are too great that miscommunication happens, regardless of the words and language spoken. You have reached the end of this post. Thanks for listening, Stay tuned for more and always remember, mental health is important. Take care.
We are hiring. As in always, red flags in the workplace. The series Part 1. Welcome. How open job positions can trigger a red flag for the new workplace. When a company constantly has open job positions, it can mean one of two things. Number 1, the business is booming. The company is always moving forward. The workload is increasing, and so is the number of employees. Pretty cool, right? Now let's take a look at the other reasons for having open job positions constantly. It may be due to the simple fact that the business is struggling and not because of a shortage of clientele. For the sake of the argument, let's say that the business in question has plenty of customers and is in an office environment and not some part-time 24/7 convenience store. Meaning that people are being hired based on knowledge, skills, and experience. Or at least that's how it should be. So then, if traffic is not the issue, what is? Let's explore. If the business has plenty of profit coming their way, then the other possible reason for the company's struggles can only be coming from the inside of the company. The usual suspect for that is, most likely, the management. Why simple? If the company in question is not experiencing financial difficulties, like not being able to pay their employees and such, then the company should be able to keep everyone happy, right? Well, more or less. The reason behind we are hiring probably lies with the management's lack of professional attitude, meaning that the company is not able to sustain long-term employees. Here are a few examples. Micromanaging. That is never a good thing to have in any setting. Every management consultant business knows how damaging micromanaging is to the business, solely because of the same scenario. One person is overseeing a ton of work and has one too many responsibilities on their plate. Now, how is micromanaging different from multitasking? In a way, both activities are similar, and in today's day and age, multitasking is one of the top priority skills when getting hired for work. However, the difference lies in what actions are being managed. For instance, if we are talking about whether a person can multitask between reviewing documents, answering emails and calls, and solving client problems, then that is multitasking. Pretty simple. But if we have someone who needs to be in charge of VIP client problems while hiring new personnel and training them, all the while solving major technical issues, as well as having the payroll ready, then that is what is called micromanaging. Because this way, we have someone who is responsible for different work positions rather than tasks. Unfortunately, for most micromanagers, a task and a position is synonymous, which is a mistake. Different positions, such as hiring of new recruits, accounting, IT solutions, and customer support, should be handled by separate people, not one person. Each position has their own nuances, responsibilities, and specifics. One person cannot possibly be an expert in everything. Well, at least it is not recommended-ish. What micromanaging truly shows about the person acting on it, and the company they are working for, is only that they are not able to sustain people in the long run. That could be handling all those different positions. Micromanaging should not be seen as something awesome and a show of skill. The psychology behind micromanaging shows that the person doing it could be lacking in confidence and trust in their own skills as well as in the abilities of their teammates. It is only fair to mention that micromanagers who choose to micromanage, not because of shortage of workers, but because of their own personal fears, distrust, and need for control, can only be doing it with a weak mindset as the basis for their work style. That is why they choose to oversee the work themselves. Because if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. Well, yes and no. What micromanaging does is slow down the work performance for the entire company. If employees need to wait for one person's seal of approval, who is already dealing with a ton of other issues, that never seem to decrease, but on the contrary, only keep piling up. Then getting any work done within the set deadlines becomes mission impossible. Matters that could be solved on the spot get pushed back, because the small details fade in comparison to the bigger problems, causing nothing else except delays. As a result, work quality drops, and with it, needless issues rise, followed by complaints from clients and employees. Now let's look at how micromanaging influences the rest of the workplace. One way is that if one person is multitasking to such a degree, then one must ask if the same level of multitasking will be asked of others as well. This is an important part when starting a new position. Of course, it is beneficial for the employees of the company to be familiar with the inner workings of the company they work for. However, that should not mean that everyone should be doing everything. Next up, we have teamwork. Good teamwork is based on people doing their jobs and having effective communication with each other. Take, for instance, the movie Sunshine of 2007, a science fiction piece where a team of astronauts are on a mission to save Earth. Nothing new in this concept. However, the point here is that their team is consistent of an expert in each field needed for said mission. Other team members may have some clue or knowledge about the fields of others, but when the question is, who is responsible for what, everyone focuses on their respectable areas. As a team of strong mindsets should be, ideally, in a workplace environment. In a team where everyone is doing everything, certain things are bound to get overlooked because the feeling of responsibility gets divided. See if this sounds familiar? No, I didn't do it, I thought you'd get it. See the point? When the someone else will get it attitude comes into play, people tend to slack off. This is crucial because that causes a drop in work performance and it becomes difficult to track down issues and mistakes, thus turning the workplace into a contest of pointing fingers rather than a team. Another issue with strong multitasking is that employers get greedy. More on that in the part 2 of the series. You have reached the end of this post. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for more, and always remember, mental health is important. Take care.